Insulin. Yes. These are the two things we're talking about today: insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. Insulin, it seems a bit of a scary word for some. I mean, its association with health problems is understandable. However, I think there is a misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about this hormone. And I want to talk to you about insulin resistance, and therefore I can't leave out insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin sensitivity. The number of times that I hear confusion of this subject, it seems there is a lot of misinformation out there, and perhaps this is started by Big Pharma that pervades our health system and media, but we'll leave that for another video for now. Let's just keep it simple for now. Why should we know about this subject? Well, it's very important, and it affects our health and therefore our daily lives. Now, I've got this little whiteboard, and I'm going to do a sort of a visual guide to help understand what I'm talking about. Now, insulin in today's educational video is going to play a role in absorbing sugar from our food and how the body uses insulin to allow glucose to be absorbed into the body, our body cells. Oh dear. Now, here is the wall of the cell, and here we'll have, so it's not drawn to scale to just give you a good idea of what's going on. So essentially, here's a little channel, and then we'll have, there's a protein in this channel, and this allows molecules to come into the cell. So this is inside the cell, and this is outside the cell. Okay. So when you eat food, the primary objective of eating food is to raise your blood glucose levels, blood sugar levels. That's the point of eating. Now, bear with me on this one. As I say, there's a lot of confusion out there, so you may have heard supposedly other things out there and information, but we'll get to that in a moment. So when you've eaten your food, or whatever it is, your banana or whatever, so you eat it, it starts to be digested already in the mouth from enzymes. It goes down into your stomach, and then the food is being broken down, and the body will release insulin. Now, the point of the body then releasing insulin is so that blood can be absorbed from the food, sent via the bloodstream, and absorbed into the cell. So the glucose comes along this like this little glucose molecule, and it comes towards the receptor site, and at the receptor site there'll also be insulin will have been released, and the insulin will bind with the glucose, will bind with this site here. So the insulin is here, glucose comes in, and then the insulin with the glucose allows the glucose to then move through the cell cell wall, cell membrane, and into the cell. So the glucose has come along, the insulin receptor site here. So this is insulin receptor site. Glucose is then absorbed into the cell because of insulin, and insulin allows the body to absorb glucose, sugar, and use it as its fuel to power the cell. I say we'll just keep it simple for now. Now, what affects this system, this process? Well, insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So we'll put R here and S here. So what we want to do is we want the insulin resistance to be down, and we want insulin sensitivity to be up. This is what we want. Now, I have to first mention that insulin sensitivity, where do we get this phrase from, this medical phrase or terminology? Well, I can't talk about this, and no one should talk about this to you, without mentioning that Harold Himsworth was the first person to coin this phrase, so to speak, insulin sensitivity, that we still use now, and maybe your doctor or friends or family, they mention it, and they have to understand that this is where it came from, and that was from research that was started in 1936. So yes, a long time ago. So we've had a good understanding now of insulin and its effects and what affects its ability to work efficiently. For quite a while, we've had a good understanding. So this is why we need to make sure that the right information is being read and listened to. Okay. So to decrease our insulin resistance and increase the sensitivity to insulin, we have to change our diet. Now, what did Harold Himsworth suggest increased our sensitivity and decreased resistance to insulin? Well, he recommended a high carbohydrate diet. Yes, high carbohydrate diet, and therefore low fat intake. So we want this down. So we'll have F for fat, we'll have S for sugar, carbohydrate, whatever you want to call it. Just call it sugar for now. And protein. So if you want to be leaner, maybe healthier over the long run, you don't want to develop pre-diabetes or diabetes, then when we look at the research and the knowledge, the combined knowledge that we have now, when people talk about what science tells us, we have a clear understanding that we want to have fat low, protein low intake, and carbohydrates and sugars high. This is the combination that we look for to be healthy. Now you're probably wondering, this is a bit confusing because all I hear is high fat, high protein and low carbohydrate. Well, this is what we are looking for, and what affects this so that resistance goes up and sensitivity goes down. Well, we have to go back to the insulin receptor site that I was talking about. So if I do another little model, miniature model at the top here, so we've got the wall of the cell here, and then the insulin receptor site here, where the insulin allows sugar to go inside the cell, so we want it to go this way to come in. What reduces the efficiency of this system, i.e. sugar going into the cell when it's been released via digestion? Well, when we have a lot of fat in our diet and protein, but especially fat, when you eat and the fat is being absorbed into the body, essentially fat comes in and will eventually smother the receptor site, and therefore the sugar, so we've got sugar here, we want this sugar to go in here. But because of a high fat and high protein diet, this essentially reduces sugar uptake into the cells, and the sugar level remains high in the blood. So to combat this, the body releases more insulin. So insulin goes up because it detects a low amount of sugar on the inside of the cell. So this is the inside and this is the outside. So inside, outside. So this is in the bloodstream and this is on the inside of the cell. And therefore, the body will produce more insulin because it wants to get the sugar into the cell, because that's what powers our cells. Glucose-derived ATP. But again, that's for another video in more detail. So as the body is producing more and more insulin, we call this prediabetes. Now, how do we measure? What's a really good measure of how well we absorb glucose? Well, this is the glucose oral tolerance test, where you make up some sugar water. So you add table sugar to water, perhaps 100 grams, let's say, to 500 mils of water. You drink that, then in a few hours, take a measurement, how much sugar is in the blood, keep testing this. And if you've got pre-diabetes, the level of glucose in your blood stays high, relatively speaking. Now, you've probably seen those graphs where people, I'll do it here, they show you their glucose blood levels after they've eaten. So essentially it'll be like this, and then you'll see a spike like this, spike like that. It goes up. So this is when it goes up and it comes back down. This is because your sensitivity to insulin is high and your resistance is low. But if your resistance is high, your blood levels of glucose goes up and then slowly stays up or slowly comes down, because the glucose is not being absorbed into the cells of the body. It's remaining in the bloodstream and circulating around in the blood. Again, we're just keeping it simple, but this is so information. This is so you don't get, fooled by people who are trying to tell you to eat a certain diet, or maybe when your doctor is telling you about certain, if you have to go onto medication for type 2 diabetes, so metformin, for example. So that's long-acting insulin. Ask them about these things. Ask about Harold Himsworth and his research and all of these things that I'm telling you, because once you start asking questions for yourself, then you might start to view the world a bit differently. And again, I'm not making any of this up. This is all scientific knowledge that we have. We saying, the collective of human knowledge. Okay? Right. So I'll just clear that. So how do we increase our sensitivity, decrease insulin resistance? And I was mentioning a high carbohydrate diet, a low fat and low protein diet. Low protein, low fat, and high carbohydrate diet. So if we want to have a healthy diet, we want fat low, sugar high, and protein low. So this can essentially be some of this. Now, this will reverse your type 2 diabetes. For why it does this, you've already seen so far that fat and protein increases resistance, lowers sensitivity. Well, therefore, the opposite is to increase the amount of sugar that we have in our diet. So that will be from rice and pasta, for example, and reduce the amount of fat and protein that decrease the efficiency of absorption of sugar by these smother the insulin receptor site, and again leads to eventually type 2 diabetes. So with type 2 diabetes, your body is producing more insulin than it needs to because the receptor sites, inverted commas, aren't working properly as they should, efficiently, and the glucose remains high in the blood. Now, to make sure that you are able to reverse this or ever even stop is to cut out fatty foods. So I've got some crackers here, for example. Now these do have a lot of sugar in them, but if we look at the packaging here on the box, I hope that zooms in, you can see there. Come on, camera. So if you weren't able to see that, so per 100 grams, there's 18.7 grams of fat, but you're only getting 65.2 grams of carbohydrate. Whereas just table sugar, for example, this is, if you look at that, it says 100 grams, per 100 grams, it's 100 grams of sugar or carbohydrate. And for that, you're getting no fat at all. So this is very lean. When we talk about lean food, when I mention lean food, I mean it doesn't have fat on it. Fat, if you got a lot of extra weight, you don't see they're a lean person, do you? Because they're covered in fat. But sugar, it's lean because it's not covered in fat. So these are not lean because they're sugar covered in fat. So the common misperception is about donuts, for example. Oh, but the sugar in the donut, well, that's sugar sprinkled on a blob of fat, essentially. So donuts are the foods that you want to avoid because they're very fatty. But if you want to increase the efficiency of your insulin and be healthier in the long run, then you want to increase carbohydrate intake and lower your fat and lower your protein intake. Now this might seem all a little bit confusing, and you can go back and rewind the video, and if I didn't maybe portray the information particularly well, just you can leave a question in the comments. But if this helped and maybe cleared the mist of understanding, then subscribe and like the video, and I'll do more. And I think I'll do more on this topic because there's a lot to cover. What to eat, how do I increase my insulin sensitivity, decrease resistance. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for your time. See you in the next one.